How about now? Are you hearing this? Let's see. There we go. Okay. Yes. Boom. All right. So, folks, a lot to discuss today, right? First of all, I wanted to thank Fabuli and anybody else who's been supporting the Twitch channel so far because I'm officially qualified for affiliate status. So I've leveled up in the Twitch universe, and I don't have actual affiliate status yet. That's coming, but because I have to do a bunch of fucking paperwork and check boxes and things, but it is coming. So probably the next time I stream, I will be affiliate status. I have you guys to thank for that, and let's keep going and growing. The second thing, I guess, to mention, if you didn't catch the last live stream, this was with Stephen Wertheim. It was a great talk. He's at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Um, and I've got a big segment today where I want to talk about think tanks, dark money, dark think tanks, what's going on there. Carnegie Endowment for International Peace is in the mix of the Washington think tank world, but it's one of the least scummy of all the of all the DC think tanks, and I'll sort of break down why. Um, and then because the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft has a new report out about funding transparency in think tanks, and if you're a good materialist, you of course have to follow the money, right? So that's that's to come. I'm not going to get to that quite yet. And then I guess to start off, oh, also, if you want to support the pod, right? The Rivalry Peril is available for pre-order right now. It'll be out in a couple weeks. And the content of the book, because if you'll see the subtitle, How Great Power Competition Threatens Peace and Weakens Democracy, including economic democracy. And we have a whole chapter on that. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in the episode because it converges with one of the segments. And yeah, what else? Oh, I wanted to start off with a little bit of absolute fucking nonsense, which is that Hillary Clinton has received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from one Joseph Old Man Biden. Okay, so let us share this real quick. There's not a lot to see here, but you'll get the gist very quickly.
Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Earlier today, President Biden awarded the Medal of Freedom to 18 honorees, including former Arkansas and United States First Lady Hillary Clinton. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, as you just saw and heard, received a standing ovation from the crowd as she received her medal. Clinton was accompanied to the event by her husband, former President Bill Clinton, daughter Chelsea Clinton, and grandchildren.
Together, you leave an incredible mark. And I mean this sincerely, this group of you leave an incredible mark on our country, with insight and influence that can be felt around the globe in major cities and remote areas alike.
The Presidential Medal of Freedom has been awarded 654 times between 19...
What a joke. Okay. The reason, so if you saw in the way that news clip covered it, the Presidential Medal of Freedom is like the highest honor that the president can give to a civilian. You know, it's the ultimate reward, the ultimate accolade. And the idea that like this absolute ruling class warmonger would be, hey, death of Philippe Auguste, welcome. The idea that this like warmonger whose husband and she perpetuated an American hegemony that was grounded in neoliberalism, that forced workers into this race to the bottom, that just totally grifted as part of the ruling class. That was fucking I mean, like that she's a militarist hawk through and through. She's on Israel's side against the Palestinians right now. You know what I mean? The queen of the liberal international order. That's fucked. So that's Hillary Clinton. I don't need to spend a bunch of time Hillary bashing. What I think is notable, given that she's queen of war crimes, is that you saw how the news covered this. It was like a Wikipedia entry. They just said, like, she was accompanied by her daughter, Chelsea Clinton, by her husband, Bill Clinton, the former president. This is a high honor, right? But Biden is like, she helped change the world. Yes, for the worse, you know? So this is, there's like a reputation laundering that goes on with this award. And it's kind of like whatever, like of course the ruling class sort of pats itself on the back, of course. The thing is, and of course Biden is like still locked into this mindset and totally unrepentant about anything. The same day that he gave her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, he also announced like an $8 billion aid package for Israel. Just not even doubling down on the genocide in Gaza and America's complicity in it, but like quadrupling down, quintupling down, 10x it, 8x it, just keep fucking doing it. The only way he's like, it's the equivalent of like posting through it, he's posting through it on a genocide with arms sales. It's like, well, we've already sunk cost fallacy. Let's just lean in and do it even more, So that's pretty evil. But I guess the thing that's like, aside from the reputation laundering and the way the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Hillary Clinton gets covered by various media outlets in this very bland, sanitized, well, she won and this is the highest honor, so here we go. Like, putting all that aside, I think it's revealing about those in power, including and especially the Democratic Party, right? You look at like, God, the Kamala campaign and the Biden campaign before it. How could they have possibly lost to Trump? Well, look at who their gods are. Who do they celebrate? Who do they give the highest awards to? Hillary fucking Clinton. The whole structure of their sort of belief system about who's in and who's out, who deserves power and who doesn't, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. That entire worldview of Democratic Party leadership still is in a unipolar mindset. They still think it's the fucking 90s. They still think the Clintons are fucking great. Hillary has a teaching slot at Columbia University. What is she qualified to teach? She's very smart. She knows how to read talking points that other people wrote for her. But what she says, mouth, is just jaw on behalf of capital, on behalf of people who pay her husband's foundation or pay her money to speak, And all of that's about power brokering and access. There's not an original idea that's come out of her head in my lifetime. Not fucking one. Not since Hillary Care in the 90s. That was the most her idea. And that ended up being a total failure. And she ran away from it and decided to become a national security hawk ever since. Anyways, I'm done talking about Hillary Clinton. Stop making me talk about her. Okay? Fancy Philip Floppy. So, all right. Enough about the one Hillary Rodham Clinton. There was I talked the last couple streams about the New Year's terrorism incidents and about Generation GWAT, the global war on terror. I did a segment on this. I wrote in the newsletter, undiplomatic.com, un-diplomatic.com. But like I've covered this terrain many times before, and I will probably continue to be because it's relevant. We have an entire generation of people whose formidable years were a failed global war that is still with us, and they are all fucking sick of it. And that they includes thee. Wait, no, me, not thee. I mean, it probably includes thee too, but it's me, right? So, this is the context that those terrorist attacks emerged from. It's not random that they were military veterans and that they had both served in Afghanistan, these New Year's Day attacks, right? Especially the Green Beret. So like, this is very fucked. And I'm not the only one to notice the thing. I want to play this short clip from Democracy Now! With Mike Preisner. He has some useful things to say, and then I just have like one thought to add to this. Wonderful little clip. Yeah, fun fact, she brings Bill around, so she does. I think about that sometimes genuinely, like maybe you should have your B team, C team, the losers around you that make you look better. Like maybe that's a ruling class tactic. All right, so let me play this clip real quick. Da-da-da, where's it at? There we go.
Military service is now the #1 predictor of becoming what is called a mass casualty offender, surpassing even mental health issues as a profiler. There are many different consequences of having a massive military empire, the biggest humanity has ever seen, both in its sheer size, its expanse around the world, one that is constantly engaged in endless and morally indefensible wars around the world. And one of those consequences is the violence abroad coming back against people at home. Leibesberger, of course, is
the violence abroad coming back to people at home. Just real quick, that's the Imperial Boomerang that Michel Foucault talked about. I'm rereading Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth right now. And in fact, I read it a few years ago for the first time. I'm getting something different out of it right now. And there's like an intense geopolitics to Fanon's worldview, to decolonialism, right? And there's more to say about that. I'll bracket that off for now. But in the preface to the book, Jean-Paul Sartre wrote the preface, and it was flattering to Fanon, but like it's extremely sort of damning of the West and of European colonialism, of course. And Sartre, one of the points he makes is this Imperial Boomerang language. He's like, because at the time that they were writing this, and that Sartre was writing this in 1961, Algeria was fighting for its freedom, but there was also these extreme right-wing military guys that were attacking France itself. I mean, like right-wing French military guys. They became paramilitaries, and then they started attacking fucking France, So they were committing, again, military veterans committing terrorism. And this was happening because they wanted France to basically genocide the Algerians, to fight harder, to not give up or like leave Algeria, right? This was a colonial territory that they had taken, and they were willing to die and kill for it. This, far right extremists going to do what far right extremists going to do. But Sartre diagnosed that as the Imperial Boomerang, this violence of these right-wing fucks who are coming and attacking the French nation itself. They were born of this hierarchical, exploitive colonial relationship that France had established in Algeria. And so the violence that they did abroad came home eventually. There's more than one pathway by which the Imperial Boomerang comes back, but the lesson is always that when you do violence and harm abroad purposely to your benefit and to the expense of others, you're sowing the seeds of your own destruction. You are visiting future harm upon yourself. It's guaranteed. It's inevitable. It happens in more than one way. And that's what France experienced. Sartre was speaking about that, the Imperial Boomerang. But that's also what's literally happening to us right now. And we have to be able to understand that. Let me finish this clip. It's just like 1 minute, but he makes some extremely good points here.
career was one of killing. And then, the New Orleans attacker says he was inspired by ISIS. The mass killing ideology of ISIS. ISIS would not exist were it not for the US military's complete destruction of Iraq and mass killing of innocent people. America in general, of course, has a mass violence problem. Mass shootings happen quite regularly, more than once a day on average. And that the reasons for that are linked to US militarism, both in that kind of cultural domination of a country that glorifies violence and exports violence, but more so a government that is presiding over a country with deep and extreme social problems, which it refuses to address while having a blank and endless check for militarism abroad and an ever-increasing budget for the military-industrial complex. And so this gives rise to an extreme amount of social problems in our society that are rooted in things like alienation and inequality and desperation and despair and hopelessness. And then so the US military comes in and for the purposes of recruitment must target people who are most impacted by those social problems. They bring them into an institution where they train them to kill. They train them that killing is actually quite honorable and quite cool. It sends many of those people to kill abroad. It has a notoriously, very notorious for ruining people's mental health and a mental health system that makes people's mental health problems even worse, and then spits them back out into a society where people find their lives harder than when they join. That's kind of why I think that has become a number one predictor of becoming a mass casualty offender, is all of the.
Yeah, so extremely well said, right? The takeaway analytically that he's talking about, there are studies confirming this, and The Intercept just had a piece about this. But having military service, being a military veteran, is the single greatest predictor by like a margin of like 2.6 to 1 or something like that. The single greatest predictor of whether you're going to be a mass casualty offender, which is to say a terrorist, right? Extremist violence is most likely to come from military veterans or people who have been in military culture, military service, right? And the Green Beret guy who killed himself in front of the Trump Hotel in Vegas, he was what do you call it? The manifesto letter that he left or whatever. He was describing an extreme sense of moral injury, right? Moral injury is when you observe and experience and are part of events that you find to be contrary to the set of beliefs you have about humanity and what's acceptable, what's right? It's when you're like, so your own sense of self and humanity is violated because of what you're forced to take part in. And the Green Beret guy he had been part of war crimes in Afghanistan. And so he couldn't, like, what moral injury, it's more than PTSD. Like it often leads to suicide because people can't cope with it. Like it causes the drug use that leads to the downward spiral and everything, it's pretty fucking evil shit. And it's because of what we're forcing them to do as part of the forever wars. You think you can have forever wars and it doesn't lead to this shit, fucking crazy. There's so many good points in the chat. Let me hold on one second. Let me catch up here. I was on one with my fucking yes. Let's see. Oh, Biden in New Orleans today. I didn't even know he was in New Orleans. Crocodile tears for the victims of people that he helped radicalize. Yeah, fucking indeed. The past 2 decades, this is the thing. The forever wars didn't like come out of nowhere. They're how we relate to the world in the most violent of ways. And it was a product of Capitol Hill brain, of American primacy, of the national security state, of which Biden has been the center modal median thinker this whole time. He has been on the wrong side of like every decision that Americans made the past 40 years. you know? There was one time in the early aughts where he had some interesting ideas about Iraq, but like and he wanted to get out of Afghanistan, but like he has been in favor of American militarism his whole goddamn career. You know, he has not done jack shit to suspend the forever wars, and he's in fact expanded them. To wit, we're bombing Yemen as we speak, and we have been for like a year. You know what I mean? So, fucking A. What else we got in the chat here? The unlimited super combo is where the violence that comes home is carried out by someone you can otherize and then justify the next adventure. Yep. Level up with your evil. That's right. Yeah. I mean, the thing that we've been super lucky about so far with all these terrorist attacks and assassinations and shit is that it has not been a left-wing guy. It has not been an Arab, Muslim, Palestinian, I should say, because I was about to say like one of the attackers on New Year's was Muslim, but it was not a Palestinian, right? So it's like you couldn't tie directly the terrorism to uh, advocacy for Palestine, and you couldn't tie it directly to socialism or leftism in any way, right? And the right has made such a boogeyman of even progressives like left liberals, that they equate them or conflate them with like communists. And that is a bunch of nonsense. And analytically, it's truly nonsense. It's not correct, but it is what it is. Like, if they have an excuse, if material reality changes in such a way that they can securitize the threat from, pick your demographic, brown folks, black folks, Mexicans, Chinese, leftists, right? Trans kids. If they have an excuse because of an assassination or something to go after that demographic with full military force and the CIA and shit, they're going to do it. And they might do it anyway. Yeah, I mean, but we ought not give them the fuel, so I don't know. What else we got? Oh, I appreciate that. Love to me as a vet. Yeah, so if people don't know, actually, so I started my career in the U.S. Air Force. I was enlisted. I worked in intelligence, and then I went to school at night, and that's how I ended up in the Obama administration and on this path where I'm like a public intellectual scholar guy now or whatever. But all of that was like very unlikely. I started out as the lowest of the lowest rung of the military. And in some ways, I'm like, trying to redeem myself with a politics of, peace, democracy, equality, etc. But my one of the podcasts that I host, not this one, is called Bang Bang, and it's with a fellow Marine Corps veteran who has this great memoir called Pain is Weakness, Leaving the Body, a Marine's Unbecoming. And he is a socialist, anti-imperialist. We host the Bang Bang show together, and we basically watch war movies, but then that like everybody knows and loves, Full Metal Jacket, The Siege is coming up soon. What else? We recorded one last night actually, which was about a horrible movie, a comedy called Private Valentine starring Jessica Simpson. It's available now, like on the YouTube channel for Undiplomatic. You can watch it, and on Bang Bang's Undiplomatic, Bang Bang's YouTube channel. So we released it for free. But it was a great episode to talk and critique this cultural object of this movie called Private Valentine. The movie itself fucking sucked. It was horrible. And it was kind of like girly patriotic propaganda for the national security state. It was like very rah-rah, the military is great and it'll change your life and we only do good things. That kind of shit, very one-sided. And The important thing is that the movie itself fucking sucked. But that actually makes for an entertaining episode. Like when you have a movie that's excellent, like The Battle of Algiers, there's a lot of critical insights that you can talk about, but you cannot. There's not a lot to like make fun of and make jokes about. With this movie that we did a episode on yesterday, there's a lot to make fun of. So like plenty of joke cracking, and that's just as good as critique, right? So, what else we got? Da-da-da-da-da. Yeah. Mm, 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 mm. Let's see. Oh, here, speaking of the right wing attacks. So, if you remember, like a week ago, there was the dust up between Elon Musk and the tech guys, Vivek Ramaswamy, advocating hard for the talent visa program, H-1B visa program, to bring in the 1%er immigrants, the highly skilled immigrants that have knowledge or expertise that's always in demand, and that doesn't apply to like regular visa programs or migrant visa programs or anything like that. But they were huge advocates for the H-1B, and Elon himself had come to America on an H-1B visa. Anyway, that clashes with the sort of ethno-nationalist faction of the MAGA coalition, the national conservatives, which is like the intellectuals of the Trump movement. They are like hardcore intellectually like white supremacists, right? They want an ethno state basically. And so one of the ways that finds expression is through policies of like immigration bans, and like invading sanctuary cities, and then like rounding up immigrants and deporting them. So like that's part of creating the ethno state, right? And the H-1B thing kind of clashes with that. So I showed some stuff on this, as we did a segment on this a couple days ago or a week ago, but I didn't show the ethno-nationalist side of this. There's a short clip from a white nationalist who's talking about this, and there's something instructive about what he has to say here in terms of like understanding their like I want you to understand, like, I'm not caricaturing the ethno-nationalists. The ethno-nationalists are ethno-nationalists when it comes to their fucking opinions. So this is it.
H-1B visas are for highly skilled workers who come to the U.S. legally. The number set by Congress for such visas annually is 65,000, with room for 20,000 more if they have graduate degrees from U.S. colleges. But nevertheless, that's a lot of Hindus. Remember that these are skilled and ambitious people likely to rise to positions of influence and control. That means that when it comes to America retaining its distinct identity as a nation, they clearly represent a diluting agent.
Oh, that's a lot of Hindus. That's a lot of hilariousness. Dude. Okay, so that's pretty like funny in the most racist way imaginable, right? The thing is, he's not wrong about what he's saying. If you bring in a bunch of talented foreigners, they're going to integrate into our society. They're going to become part of the fabric of who we are, and they're going to end up, because they're highly skilled and make a lot of money, they're going to end up being part of the ruling class in American society, insofar as it has a ruling class, and it always has had a ruling class. So if you don't want to have a ruling class, well, then you need to get a different kind of politics, right? That's where social democracy comes in, or like a radical transformation of politics. But if you want an ethno state, this is inherently a problem. I would imagine for all of us listening to this on the show right now, we don't have a problem. We have a problem with having a ruling class, period. But we don't have a problem with that ruling class being more diverse, or like an immigrant who comes over here becoming part of the ruling class. That's not the problem. That's fine. That at least makes the ruling class more reflective of certain demographic features of our society. That's not a bad thing. but the ruling class is a bad thing. You know what I mean? So like the politics that he says this dispassionately, unemotionally. He's very cool-headed about it, but like it bringing in immigrants who become part of the upper crust of your society is a diluting agent of the white people who are part of the ruling class in the society. This guy, the white nationalist, wants a ruling class still. He just wants it to be white, you know, not right, white. And so that is a problem. That's the fight. That's what they're trying to make happen. And they have allied with capital, with the agents of neoliberalism in a previous era in order to make that happen. And Trump is the awkward synthesis of these opposing forces. You know, the rise in ethno-nationalism, the empowerment of fucks like that guy, the white nationalist, the salience of his voice has been growing in American politics and in right-wing politics in other countries too, because of the conditions that capital has created, that neoliberalism created. And now those more salient hard right voices, extremist racist voices, are finding power and finding grievance that they can exploit. And to gain power themselves, they're allying with the agents and the forces, capital, that created these conditions in the first place. And that's an awkward coalition to hold together. But Trump represents that synthesis. So there's more that this will come up again in the future. This is an ongoing fight. I said this is one of the contradictions in the coalition, and it is. So we'll hit that. Well, let me check in on the chat here. Sorry. I keep like when I start going off on my shit and I'm like making some logical, impassioned argument, I like forget to look over at the chat box. So let me see. The hombres are too good. Which kind of assholes do you want? That's a good way to put the question of like, you know, do you want a ruling class or not? Like if the issue is who's in the ruling class, it really is a question of like, which assholes do you want, you know? But I would hope that we have a politics that tries to like create a world that doesn't require some to rule others, you know? That's the fucked up part. They're sending their best, and that's why we have to keep them out. Ha ha. Okay, so what is next here? Oh, so this is the big thing that I was going to talk about today. Dark think tanks. There's a few other things to cover, but the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, let me pull this up. They have a new report, kind of a big deal. It got a lot of attention. So I'm going to actually write about, I haven't had a chance to write in the newsletter about this yet. Undiplomatic.com, un-diplomatic.com. But I'm going to write about this because I had a piece, one of the most popular things I ever wrote in the newsletter was my back of the napkin political map of Washington think tanks. And I tried to create like, I wrote, it started out as an email to a former student. I end up like doing informal advice things with a lot of young people about just career stuff in international relations or adjacent, you know, policy stuff. And I was trying to give this former student a lay of the land of like what different Washington think tanks were about. What was their reputation? Are they hawkish? Are they corrupt? Are they dirty? Are they good? Are they progressive? Where are they? I mean, most of them are bad, so it's not that complicated. But I like trying to give the landscape so that she didn't apply to the wrong places, and she had applied to a couple of the what I would consider the wrong places, right? So I ended up making a newsletter post about it, and I broke out categories of like, these are the think tanks that are on the dark side. These are the think tanks that are the good guys. The list was not long. And then these are the think tanks that are sort of in between, or it depends, or they're a big umbrella think tank that houses multiple tendencies, you know. And so I was just painting the landscape, but it was back of the napkin. It ended up being like a viral-ish post, but I didn't put a ton of effort into it. It was just based on like my impressions and my experience. I did not have data. This report by the Quincy Institute has data, right? And interestingly, they apply it to themselves too. Like they include their own think tank in the mix. Although there are some caveats I should throw on that deserve mentioning too. But anyways, this report, very good, very worthwhile, by Ben Freeman and Nick Cleveland Stout. So big ideas and big money, think tank funding in America. This is about the transparency and the sources of funding for the quote unquote ideas industry, if you will, right? And they developed a tracker so that you can look up the funding sources for any think tank that's going to testify before Congress and yada yada yada. So I think you can hopefully see this. Maybe I'll blow it up a little bit. So there's like three big parts of this report. One is this think tank transparency scores. So some think tanks are very transparent about their funding sources, and others are very opaque about it. The think tanks that are getting like mystery funding from like who knows where, they call that dark money. So think tanks that are funded by dark money are like huge red flags, right? That's inherently a problem. It's almost certainly corrupt. And so the more you rely on dark money for your funding, the bigger of a mouthpiece you probably are for sectional interests of capital, of the defense industrial complex, or of the ruling class of a foreign government, and quite possibly a despotic foreign government, right? So those are corrupting sources of influence. If you have a mouthpiece, a think tank that is funded, that exists because of corrupt sources of funding or unaccountable sources of funding, dark sources of funding, the advice that spews out of their mouth and the analysis that comes from them is not trustworthy. It's just propaganda, and they ought to be registered as lobbyists under FARA, Foreign Agent Registration Act, right? But think tanks are not registered under FARA. They're not considered foreign lobbyists, right? They're not considered lobbyists at all legally, but functionally, they generally are. Think tanks, by and large, like this report, is analytically good. It's sound, it's legit. This is not what most think tanks do most of the time. Most of the time, they are advocacy organizations. And when you advocate for shit, you're advocating on behalf of an interest group. Who is that interest group? That's the question. And those interest groups in the think tank world are overwhelmingly corrupt sources. The national security state itself, defense industrial interests, literally Lockheed Martin, which we'll cover in a second, right? So anyways, the think tank transparency scores, so like who are the most transparent think tanks where they literally list all their funding sources? Stimson Center, the Berggren Institute is like an anomaly. They're funded by this guy, Nicholas Berggren, who's a billionaire. I think it's based in LA, and they do interesting work sometimes, but it's literally an institution built around the funding from one person, right? So like a bit of an anomaly. The Stimson Center is the best in this ranking. And I've said before, the Stimson Center is like one of the best mainstream think tanks in DC. Their money sources are extremely transparent, so that tracks. And one of my co-hosts of this show, Julia Gledhill, she works at the Stimson Center. Okay, so that all checks out. Anyways, Van Jackson gets 100% of his $0 of Twitch revenue from. Dude, yeah. So once I get affiliate status, I might go from $0 to like $3. I don't know. Right now, this Twitch channel is generating no revenue because I have not been in affiliate status. Now that I'm about to become an affiliate status, the pennies are going to be coming in. Boom, boom, 1 cent, 1 cent, 1 cent. I can feel it. I'm going to be penny rich. Anyway, yeah, you don't have to. The thing that whatever you think of my analysis and my opinions, the quality of my writing, the quality of my voice, whatever, I am not bought and paid for. And it's hard to say that about most people in this space. Like, that's what makes me singular. And you can bet if I ever take money from a source that's like meaningful amounts of money, like if a billionaire wants to give me money, I will be happy to tell everybody about it. You know what I mean? Because it's not that I'm opposed to being paid by billionaires, but I do think that like you should be transparency in lending, that kind of thing. Yeah. Stimson had Eugene Goals on to talk about defense. I didn't know Eugene Goals was part of the non-offensive defense movement. As a side note to this think tank stuff, I should bracket off. One of my like pet research things is this non-offensive defense strategy stuff. And there's like a coalition of us that's growing, that's kind of building, that's trying to bring this back. So like in the 80s, a lot of European intellectuals, scholars and stuff, and defense analysts in Europe and then increasingly in America started developing ideas about how to do defense strategy in a way that would be non-provocative, that would help build confidence between enemies, and that would be stabilizing. And it involved, of course, lots of defensive postures, reductions in weapons deployments and reductions in the defense budget and all this stuff. And the whole idea was like, if you can create a more stabilizing environment for militaries, then they have fewer excuses to advocate for militarism. And that opens up space for a politics of peacemaking or peacecraft, So the unipolar moment shut all that shit down. And that's like one of the dirty secrets of history that nobody ever talks about, or a lot of people don't even know. The unipolar moment foreclosed on the non-offensive defense alternative future, and then created this like hegemony. Everyone's dependent on American power bullshit. Anyways, in the last few years, there's been a few of us trying to bring back this non-offensive defense tradition. And we're going to have like a study group about it. I teach non-offensive defense in one of my strategic studies courses, so I'm always on the lookout for like people in this orbit. So this will be coming together increasingly in 2025. There's a TBD, more to be said about that. Let me check in real quick on the chat. There's a lot going on here. New Zealand Yes, I'm a friend of the New Zealand Fabian Society, but they sure as hell don't pay me anything. Last time I checked, Fabian societies everywhere have no money. Yeah, all right. So back to the report. Okay. The most transparent institutions, the Berggruen Institute is transparent because it's one dude. Stimson Center is the most transparent normal think tank. CNAS, I used to work at CNAS. They're one of the bad think tanks in my, I don't want to go into it right now. They are not on the good guy list, but they are transparent, fairly transparent about their sources of funding, in part because they think they're the good guys. And because they think they're the good guys, they think they have nothing to hide. And so the result is that we find out that they are lavishly funded by the defense industrial complex. It's unbelievable. It's grotesque. There's a story to be told about why I left all of that behind. But as long as you think you're not doing bad, and if you think well of yourself, you're more likely to be transparent, And so that's the case with CNAS. It to a lesser degree, that's also the case with CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Again, not one of the good guy institutions, but it is what it is. And then, yeah, as you go down the list, when institutions are getting less and less transparent, well, we get eventually down to, in the scorecard here, Heritage Foundation, um, Human Rights Watch, which is not a bad guy institution, but they just have low transparency about funding sources. CSBA is a bad guy institution, low transparency, right? AEI, pure dark money, and that they're clearly on the naughty list, a bunch of the FDD, Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, super bad guy list. They're basically like APAC, the think tank, and that's all dark money. Hoover Institution, bad guy list. There are occasional anomalies like the Belfer Center at Harvard. I don't know who funds that, and clearly it's on dark money, but like, I don't think they're bad guys. They're like, they don't really have a clear agenda at all. So anyways, and then there's a bunch in between. What this highlights to me, the transparency aspect of this report, is that you cannot draw conclusions without investigating a specific think tank. So if you're going to condemn a specific think tank, you have to go deeper. But if you're zooming out and looking at the pattern, the global pattern that ought to be condemned, that there's a system level problem here, is that there's a tendency for the more transparent institutions, only a tendency, to be better and less evil. And then there's a tendency for the dark money institutions to be evil. So there is a strong correlation between dark money and an evil think tank agenda, right? That's notable, but there is clear exceptions, right? CNAS and CSIS, they're fairly transparent, but I'd put them on the bad guy list. You know what I mean? So there's some interesting work, like you could take this work in further directions. The second thing in this think tank report that's super interesting, maybe even more interesting than the transparency point, is like, there's two major sources of corrupting influence in the form of money and in the form of funding at these think tanks. And one is foreign government funding or foreign interests funding. And then the other is militarist funding, the defense industrial money. There's a third category that this report did not touch, which is oligarch funding, which is to say the billionaire class. And I've got to imagine that the Quincy Institute didn't go there because they are funded by billionaires, which is the Koch brothers. They're on Koch money, but they also got some money from the Soros Open Society, I guess. So like, should that like a more comprehensive report would address billionaire or corporate sources of funding, period. But this is still pretty good and pretty self-aware, right? And it's just because it doesn't do fully what you want. Like, I want a report that also addresses oligarch sources of funding. Just because it doesn't do what you want doesn't mean it's no good. This is actually excellent. This is an extremely excellent report. For example, this fucking chart right here, which you will not be able to see it in great detail, but I'll just speak to it, right? The foreign government donors between 2019 and 2023, the top governments, and then how that cashes out at the various institutions, right? The UAE is on top, Qatar, and then on this, there's another chart here. Where is it? Here we go. Saudi Arabia. So like the Gulf states are the most egregious about this, throwing money around, but Japan, Norway, Germany, Australia, increasingly, South Korea. South Korea there's a case where like a prominent think tanker that I knew at the Council on Foreign Relations was arrested for basically like unregistered lobbying, influence peddling on behalf of a foreign government, because they were the indictment or whatever against her was about her not registering under the Foreign Agent Registration Act, even though she was like literally, according to them, taking orders from South Korean government. And as we know, the South Korean government has not been democratic. It's been fairly autocratic the last couple of years, you know. But anyways, these foreign sources of money, if you bracket off the Gulf states, it's overwhelmingly from democracies, but it's still foreign interests. And if this report doesn't go into it, but if you look deeper into the sources of these pots of money, it's not it they're it's partisan sources of money, in the sense that it represents the interests of the national security states of these foreign governments. It's not from the people of Norway. It's not from the people of Japan. It's not from Australian civil society. It's from the national security state bros doing hawky shit and foreign defense industrial interests, right? And so one of the features of American hegemony that has been distinct is this of the reality that foreign policy in many important ways has been available for sale to the highest bidder. And it just happened, like under neoliberal globalization, that's one of the things that has transpired. Like foreign policy is bought and paid for by our allies and partners a lot of time. They pay us as a way of sustaining the system that they benefit from. Do their people benefit from it? Not so much. But does their ruling class benefit from it? You fucking better believe it, you know? So they're willing to pay for the privilege to some degree. And so a lot of the reason why Washington talks so much about alliances, they have like this horny alliance fetish, all the Washington bros. The reason for that, I mean, at some point, the superstructure becomes the part of the base or whatever. But like, it's the reason for that is because that's what they're paid to love. When they go overseas, their alliances, the barbarian handlers in the host country, they're taking them around to the nice sushi, the luxury hotels, the best sites, the wonderful conference rooms. They have wonderful experiences. They build sociality. They build real friendships with national security state bros in these other governments. That's how they create and recreate this corrupt, monolithic, intellectually bubble. And then those people in those foreign governments send money into the think tanks because they know the think tanks will promote the idea that the alliances are great and good and the source of all the good things in the world. They keep the bad things at bay in the world. And ultimately, they know that think tanks are the place where political appointees sit. Most political appointees come from, in each presidency, come from think tanks, right? It wasn't always like that, but it's been like that my entire lifetime. And so people know if you throw money at a think tank, you're basically like buying a relationship access into a future administration. And it's cheap. We're cheap. We're whores. You know what I mean? It's like from the perspective of a national government, imagine you can get influence to somebody like Kurt Campbell, and all you have to do is put his consulting firm on retainer for $10,000 a month, plus give a grant to his think tank, a couple $100,000 a year. And you can literally shape U.S. policy, the future of the U.S. in a future administration, you know? And it's not quid pro quo, it's sociality. It's a mutual understanding. It's a shared worldview that you're paying into, and you're providing material incentives to keep that worldview rigid. And this is the source of alliance centrality in American primacy. The rhetoric of American primacy, at least under Democrats, focuses intensely on alliances. It alliance washes American militarism, American primacy. And part of the reason for that is because the alliances are paying into the pocket. They're paying into the coffers of the intellectuals in the think tanks here in Washington. You know, this is more egregious with the Gulf, though, because the Gulf is not a bunch of democracies. It's a bunch of oil monarchies and autocratic regimes, and they're throwing money around like crazy. That's a problem. That's corruption. So it's useful to know which countries are doing this the most. And then it's also useful to know, if you can see this chart here, yeah, top think tanks funded by foreign governments. Now that's an important data point, right? The Atlantic Council is horrific on this count. So a small tangent, when I was getting out of OSD, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, in 2014, I was transitioning into the think tank world for a period of time. I left that behind. It was a gross world. That's a story for another day. But at that time, the Atlantic Council had existed, but it was a backwater. Like, it was not an influencer, mover, shaker, prominent think tank. And then around the time 2014 that I got out, I can't remember, Fred Kemp, and that might have been his name. He was like a rainmaker at Atlantic Council, bringing in funding, and the funding increases the influence and the relevance, the fanciness of the conference, the voices that you can buy to put on your panels, and that kind of thing, right? And so the Atlantic Council, in the span of like 2 years, 3 years, went from being kind of a backwater think tank to being one of the like top tier DC think tanks. But it was on the back of, like the chart shows here, foreign government money, and who was the guy? He was a Mormon who had been ambassador. He was by Obama's ambassador to China. God, I can't remember his name. Oh, John Huntsman, that motherfucker. So he was going to be a presidential candidate at one point. He ended up like on the board of the Atlantic Council. He had some prominent advisory role at the Atlantic Council, and he and whoever the other guy that was heading it was, they were just bringing in foreign money left and right. And so, like, literally there was 2 or 3 people at the top who transformed the place. And if you think they're one of the good guys, they transformed it for the better, obviously. I think otherwise. They gave an award to Giorgia Meloni, the far right Italian politician, last year. They've been uber hawks on Ukraine and on China. They haven't had shit to say about Palestine. Palestine, in their view, doesn't fucking exist. So, like, that's what foreign government money buys you. They did a lot. There's a lot of controversies that have emerged over the years, with like Saudi Arabia funding and that kind of thing. So, anyways, if you're getting tons of money from a foreign government, you're very likely to be a national security hawk institution. And when you look at the top 3 think tanks on this list of foreign funding, you kind of see that. Brookings is in the middle, and they do some more reasonable stuff. But the German Marshall Fund is pretty hawkish. It's like Ukraine, EU, Euro hawks. The Atlantic Council, very hawkish. The Rand Corporation is a fucking super weird place, because it's basically like a in-house defense contractor think tank for the Pentagon. But they also have housed some extremely heterodox thinkers over the years, not least being the Pentagon Papers guy. And even now, I know onesie-twosie people at Rand who are like truly independent thinkers. They don't have my exact worldview, or like they don't share the politics of like people on this show, but they are, I don't know, like intellectually honest. And so like Rand is a weird place, but it's also interesting that as like an in-house kind of defense think tank, they're increasingly getting a lot of foreign money. Let me check in on the chat here real quick. Isn't foreign government funding only what is disclosed? So like FDD, not only foreign government money. So we'll get this, I'll get to this in the report in a second, but like CNAS, for example, a lot of the money that they get, most of it is from like the Lockheed Martins and the Boeings and the Northrop Grummans, and they disclose that also. The problem is, like, unless you're testifying before Congress, there's no real requirement to reveal your funding sources and funding amounts. So think tanks share what they think is like in their interest to share, basically. And FDD is bad guys. I don't know what to say about that. Evan 237, horny alliance fetish. Oh, I said that, right? Use undiplomatic being marked as explicit for the other reason. Yeah. So yeah, you know what? Israel is not, I don't know what to make of this, but like Israel is not mentioned in this report, I don't think. And APAC is not, like, look at this list. I don't know if, let me see this. Like, Israel is not on this list, but they spend unbelievable amounts of money in the form of APAC. Tens of millions of dollars on buying elections. You know what I mean? So like the report itself has some blind spots, and again, like, maybe that's got something to do with like APAC not focusing on the think tanks per se, other than the Foundation for Defensive Democracies, though. But anyways, we see a correlation again. So with transparency, there was a correlation. Like, the darker the money, the more likely you're to be a bad guy think tank, right? And then the more foreign the money, the more likely you are to be a bad guy think tank. And there's exceptions to all of this. You have to like peel back the onion. You have to, like, before you indict any specific think tank, you kind of have to do your homework. But as a general tendency, it's useful to know these things. For people who don't know, the Hudson Institute is one of the, like, they were an early MAGA think tank, and they've existed since the like 60s or 70s, but they're like, I don't know how they would characterize themselves, but like they're kind of like an ethno-nationalist think tank, and they have like they've built very close ties to like the national security hawks from the Trump world. The other thing, the final part of this report that's super interesting, this is the real follow the money in the other way, not just the alliance fetish way, the Pentagon, the defense industrial interests way, right? So Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Mitsubishi, Boeing is lower on this list than I would have thought, right? Airbus, General Atomics, this is, defense industrial complex stuff. These are companies that rely overwhelmingly for their revenue on contracts with the Department of Defense, right? Palantir, SAIC, yeah, not a surprise. The thing that is, again, the cross-referencing, these funding sources, the defense industrial complex funding sources with the think tanks, that's the super interesting and kind of damning part here. So again, the Atlantic Council, I said they're on the bad guy list. Look at it once again. They're the top funded defense industrial complex think tank, and then right under that CNAS, right under that CSIS. None of that is a surprise. Brookings is a little bit of a surprise there. And then you go further down the list, Stimson, surprise to me. Carnegie Endowment, a little bit of a surprise, even though it's lower on the list. But like, the defense contractors throw a lot of money around DC. They spread it everywhere. It is not pay to play. Like, when I've been talking about corruption this whole time, well, I don't think it's pay to play. When I've been talking about corruption this whole time, it's system level corruption, right? There's a system that these institutions are caught within, and they become beneficiaries of defense industrial interests. And that forces them, as a matter of their own survival, these think tanks, to become advocates of defense industrial interests. And the way to do that with a clean conscience is to become a true believer in the alliance fetish. They have material incentives to believe hard in American primacy as a global public good. And so they do. And you can't expect them to go against their material interests, right? And so that's the system that has to be broken. That's what has to be changed. And but again, like, you can see the pattern, the tendency here. If it's on the take, the more it's on the take from the defense industry, the more likely it is to be doing, peddling dirty ideas on behalf of the national security state. The more transparent, the more opaque the sources of funding, the more they're reliant on dark money. Same. The more likely they are to be advocating bad guy shit on behalf of the national security state. And the more they take foreign government money, all things being equal, the more likely they are to be advocating for fucking American primacy and American militarism. Rah, rah, alliance, primacy. Let's go kill everybody, right? And all these fucks are silent on Palestine. You don't see none of these think tankers saying jack shit, even the good ones, about Palestine, about Gaza, about Israel policy, about ceasefire now. They don't say fucking shit. In private, a lot of them are fucking angsty and like they don't, because they think well of themselves. They're very uncomfortable about genocide, but they don't say shit about it in public because they know where their bread is buttered. You know what I mean? So yeah, very interesting report. There's more to be there's more in the report. For now, that's all I'll say about it. Dark money tends to be bad money, and that should be fucking obvious. There actually was one of the co-authors of the report, Nick Cleveland Stout. He posted this thing on Twitter, which is useful to look at. It's like a microcosm, a case study of this report. Let me see if I can share it. So this is from yesterday, I think. So the Atlantic Council just published a report advocating for a mutual defense treaty with Saudi Arabia. This is the most bought and paid for corrupt shit ever. I just said that like all this stuff is not pay to play. This looks like pay to play, like it looks bad. It looks like a conflict of interest for the Atlantic Council to advocate for a formal alliance defense treaty with Saudi Arabia. Why? Because, as Nick points out, Saudi Arabia is a major donor to the Atlantic Council, right? Just this year alone, over $200,000. And the report that advocates for this alliance defense treaty does not mention Saudi Arabia being a major funder. That looks like a conflict of interest. It is certainly corrupt in the systemic sense. Is it corrupt in the direct, literal smoking gun sense? I don't know. But when there's smoke, there merits an investigation. So that is a great example of why this research matters. And I, for one, am glad that somebody's doing it. The Quincy Institute has taken up the mantle. So fucking there we go. Good for them. Someone's got to do it. Let me catch up on the chat here. Cato is like my friend. I can't take to certain parties. Yeah, Cato Institute is interesting because like they're clearly on that billionaire money. Like a lot of, this is the thing. Is the enemy of your enemy your friend for practical purposes? If you play your cards right, kind of, yes. And so like Koch money is Koch's politics are bad. You know, the corruption of the Supreme Court owes something to Koch politics, but Koch money in foreign policy has been overwhelmingly good. It was the like OG source of funding against American primacy before it was cool, before it was like a common part of progressive foreign policy stuff, you know? And so there's something to be said there. You know, you can't be white glove. You can't be like, you know, your moral rectitude can't make the perfect the enemy of the good. You know, like if you're gonna fight in politics, you need to have allies, friends, you know, especially if the enemy that you're trying to confront is hegemonic and has all the fucking power, you know, that dominates, even defines what conventional wisdom even is, you know. You're gonna need friends, and that might include fucking Koch money. You know what I mean? So Cato Institute on that Koch money, but Cato Institute is pretty good on foreign policy. You know, I can't speak to their advocacy of like neoliberalism or globalization, but on foreign policy, they're like solid because they advocate for restraint in pretty much all cases. They want a downsizing of the defense industrial complex. They don't want a supermassive national security state. So their political horizons and our political horizons are not the same. We can't get confused about that. But we have tactical fights together that put us on the same side in certain respects. And so that's useful to know, you know? Yeah. So let's see. Oh, one little side story about Cato. So a friend of mine was doing like progressive foreign policy stuff in the 90s in the unipolar moment when that was not really done, and it was super rare slash unpopular in Washington. Like there wasn't this restraint movement. There wasn't a progressive foreign policy movement to speak of, really. There was no power block for it. But he was doing that stuff in the 90s. And at that time, I did like a kind of oral history with him at one point. I don't want to put him on blast and name him, but because he's still active. But he told me that like they used to do a lot of work together, his progressive foreign policy kind of institution, with the Cato Institute. And going into the 2000s in the early War on Terror years, they used to do combined Cato Institute and progressive foreign policy stuff kind of together, doing their like joint analysis and joint conferences, and they were very close. And then at some point during the War on Terror years, Bush years, the Cato guys like decided they didn't need a coalition with the progressives anymore because everything had become so right wing, and they just fucking cut bait and abandoned the coalition. And so like a lot of like intellectual property, like literally ideas and analysis that were developed and research methods that were developed by progressive foreign policy analysts in the 90s, Cato started doing some of that stuff themselves in-house and then just like breaking away from the progressive coalition. And the lesson from that that the guy was trying to like communicate to me, but also that the lesson that I take from that is like, you have to keep in mind their interests are not always your interests, and they are allying with you like for power political reasons only. They don't actually have your agenda, and their political horizons are not shared by you and vice versa. And you just got to be very clear-eyed about that. So we're on the same side in this fight. That don't mean we're on the same side in all fights. You know what I mean? And they will abandon you if it's in their interest to abandon you. So I thought that was like a useful thing to know. Yeah. So in the chat, high altitude Cherenkov, this list, the think tank report, shows only think tanks that are somewhat transparent. No, so it shows oh, I closed out the fucking window. But the report, the Quincy report, shows think tanks that are also what they call dark money think tanks. So the think tanks that reveal nothing about their funding sources. Where does their money come from? Who knows? They have like a list of like 20 think tanks that are dark money think tanks. The one that was most notable and the highest dollar amount was AEI, which should not come as a surprise. They're like uber hawks, super bad guys. They're like the hard imperialist edge of American liberalism, right? So, and obviously advocates for the plutocratic class in America. But so like that was the single most important thing about the report was flagging that dark money. So Politico magazine did this whole spread, like a above the fold thing on the Quincy Institute's dark money report. And the Politico magazine, like the hook was the dark money part. Who are the think tanks that are getting black, dark, unknown sources of funding? And that was like what the story was about in Politico. But there were all these other patterns that were useful that I think are even more important to know. Like, okay, who's getting the most ally government money? How hawky are they about allies? You know, if you're being super extra about fucking alliances, well, like, and then you're getting all your money from ally governments that don't look right, you know? What else we got in the chat here? Yeah. So I don't have an answer to this, but like the absence of Israeli government money from these funding lists is very curious to me. Like, how can that possibly be given that we know how much Israel spends on our elections? The idea that they're not spending at think tanks seems kind of like doubtful. Surely they are, right? But it's possible that they're part of the dark money. You know, like when money is not being admitted to about like where does the funding source come from, that might be dark money. Dark money also might be from defense industrial sources. We don't know, you know. So who knows? Yeah. Anyways, so that's the dark money think tank thing. Shout out to Ben Fridman and Nick Cleveland Stout for this work. And next story. Where is it at? Fuck. Oh, this is fucking great. So I was one of the OG customers at Whole Foods. This is going to sound like a hard transition from think tank corruption to Whole Foods unionizing, but it's not. It's actually part of a larger politics. But anyways, there's a great video that I want to share from More Perfect Union about Whole Foods unionizing effort, and it's a great sort of mask off about what Whole Foods as a corporation fucking is. But there's also some interesting like data that I got from Adam Tooze, his chart book newsletter, about precisely this, about Whole Foods, that I want to share too. And as a preface to talking about unionism in Whole Foods, I should say that one of the first Whole Foods locations was in Monterey, California. And I think Whole Foods might have started in like the late 90s. In the year 2000, I was in Monterey, California at the Defense Language Institute. That's where I studied. This was like such a formidable period in my life. I'm not going to like unpack that story now, but like I lived there for a year and a half studying Korean to go be a Korean linguist in the Air Force. They Air Force sent me there for a year and a half. And so every weekend I would go up to the mall, the Del Monte Center, and right next door to it was a Whole Foods. And it was fucking glorious. It was like the best of what hippies and counterculture had to offer. You know, like these giant bins of granola. It was the first time I had ever seen organic food, you know, and this is 25 years ago now, but people didn't know what Whole Foods was. It wasn't some grand national chain, and the experience of going into the store was hippy dippy in the good way, not in like the I don't take showers way, but like in the like peace, love, and healthy happiness way. The vibes, it had a vibe, like an organic vibe. It was a different experience. And I was like, oh, this is my shit. I didn't even know that was my shit. I came from the fucking hood, you know? And so I like fell in love with Whole Foods basically. And then later on I discovered Trader Joe's. And so then as a bougie Washington person, you know, wearing skinny ties and shit to work, I shopped at both of these places. They were part of my lifestyle. I imagine either Trader Joe's or Whole Foods is part of your lifestyle too. Literally everybody goes there, right? But ever since Whole Foods got sold to Amazon in 2017, it's been a totally different thing. And they were becoming more and more corporate before that, but there was a huge transition when Amazon came in, and like Americans don't really appreciate this. So I moved to New Zealand in 2017. So in 2016, I had been going to Whole Foods every week. I knew, yes, it was getting more corporate, but there was a certain kind of experience, and it still had that organic vibe, even though it was becoming more glassy and Starbucksy, right? And then I went to New Zealand where there is no Whole Foods, and I came back to America to the Whole Foods 2 years later, after post Amazon. It was a totally different experience. Whole Foods has transformed from 2016 to 2018. It became this corporate Amazonian nightmare. It felt like going to like a fancy version of Walmart, but for food. And it was like I was disoriented. It was like it was like an alien place, whereas I thought I knew this place, you know. And when I talked to Americans about it when I was visiting, I was like, oh my God, because I saw the before and I saw the after, but I didn't experience the transition. They took it for granted. The Amazon that you know right now is fundamentally different from the Amazon that you would have known even just in 2016, which was not that long ago, you know? And that's fucking weird. That's actually capitalism. And that's why I want to share this clip about unionization at Whole Foods, because it has something to do with that transition. So let me bring this up real quick.
Foods, I've noticed it's only gotten worse. It's like you're walking around in the corpse of something that used to be. Squeezing the most out of one person until you can't squeeze no more, and then you do it to the next person.
Whole Foods wants to have a progressive image. They want their customers to think that workers are happy and are treated well.
Our team members are the lifeblood. They're the secret sauce of Whole Foods Market.
Management does not treat us like that. People are surveilled. The rate at which people are at work is pushed to go faster. I think Whole Foods treats us more like robots than something that they truly care about.
Our goal is not just to help Whole Foods Market as a business. We want to be a positive change in the world.
You fucking liar.
When you take that mask off, it's just another corporation like all the others. They're no different than an oil company or, you know, a Walmart even.
Being part of Whole Foods Market. Investing in team member growth and happiness is one of our key priorities.
I haven't met a team member that hasn't struggled with how much we get paid.
People have to work 2 jobs just to survive.
They expect us to do so much in so little time. I feel like they don't care about our health and well-being, and this is why this union is happening.
Workers at this Amazon-owned Whole Foods in Philadelphia are organizing for a union, and they could be making history.
We would be the only unionized Whole Foods when we win this election, but we cannot be the last, and we definitely won't be the last.
You know, Whole Foods used to be really interesting and eclectic and fun. Things have changed. I mean, honestly, it's because of that corporatization that occurs.
Amazon bought Whole Foods Market in 2017.
For a price that should qualify for free shipping, $13.7 billion.
Now we have this warehouse mentality, you know, just general energy of like, you gotta work, you gotta do what you gotta do, and you gotta do it fast. I see it with my coworkers that do e-shopping. That surveillance is so intense that they can't breathe.
I sometimes work in the e-commerce department. That is the workers who go around the store shopping orders that are put in online. They take items off of the shelf and put it into bags in the cart and then seal up those bags and send it off to whoever ordered it.
However big or small.
So first of all, I did not even realize that was a thing. That you had like e-shoppers. They work for Whole Foods, but they package the orders or whatever that people order online. That's an Amazonovation that I was not even aware of. So, but that comment. There's like a little bit more that I'll play here in a second. But that comment about like you can't breathe. I don't know if you guys have experienced this. I don't have any. I'm a pretty chill person, and I take large amounts of stress, not in stride, but like I've been able to cope with it. I have ways to cope with it, like jujitsu, that help me get by. But when I was in high school, because I grew up poor, I was working at a fucking Greyhound racing track, and I had not joined the military yet. I had not figured out how to even go to college. The military was going to be my way to pay for college. But before I made all those decisions and getting on the track that I ended up on, I remember I was working. I had gotten off a double shift. It was like 11 o'clock at night. I was also working at Wendy's, and I was covered in filth from wrestling the greyhounds to put the numbers on them and shit. And I was exhausted and I was sick, and I was a high school student. And I remember feeling like I thought to myself for a minute, I'm never going to have a vacation. At the time I lived in Florida. I was like, I live in Florida. I'm never going to see the ocean, And I remember with all the stress of the job, which paid fucking peanuts, like minimum wage, I was like, I'm in this doom loop where even when I'm sick, I have to show up at work. Otherwise, I don't get paid. In order to go on vacation, I have to save up a bunch of money because I'm not going to be paid while I'm on vacation. And this all the more reason why I have to work even when I'm sick. But when I work when I'm sick, I get sicker, not better. And I almost started crying thinking about this. And I felt this feeling like the stress was so overwhelming that like the existential trap, it was like I couldn't breathe. And it was probably some kind of anxiety. Like, I was 17 years old. I couldn't diagnose it. But in hindsight, it was probably like an anxiety attack, And it's because like the system did that to me. Capitalism put me in that situation, And like all to say, like I know, and a lot of working class people know that, one of the things that's distinct about the working class is that there's times when you can't fucking breathe because of the stress levels of being trapped and feeling like there is like no way out, But this is why it's important to be able to have a reason to put one foot in front of the other. To have a reason to get up and fight for yourself, to feel like there's hope, to have an advocate, and that advocate is a fucking union. So let me play the rest of this real quick.
All the order is, you do have a certain time frame to finish that order before it's considered late.
Workers say they are surveilled by the second and down to the item.
The order that we get items from the shelf is predetermined by the app that we use to look at the items that are in the order. They call that the pick path. But if a manager sees somebody going out of the pick path, that is at least grounds for a scolding. And I know coworkers who have been disciplined for picking an item that is in that order, just not in the order that is listed on the phone.
Workers say Amazon-style focus on speed has made its way to Whole Foods. Jackie fulfills online orders at Whole Foods. She also works at an Amazon fulfillment center.
It's like the same structure, the speed that we have to go to make sure every order is out, whether it be packages or groceries.
That job is heavily surveilled and the metrics are watched closely.
You just got to keep constantly doing. Like if you think you can even use the bathroom, forget it. It's really awful.
Since I've started working in that department less than a year ago, the rate, it's called the UPH, which is units per hour, of how many units we take off the shelf per hour has been raised twice.
It was about 65, which is very reasonable. Everybody can do that. I went up to 80.
Most workers cannot attain that goal every single day.
And then it went up to 100.
I think it demotivates people when there's a rate that we're supposed to work at that is impossible.
This is fucked. This is how you get to a point where you literally can't breathe. It's the Amazonification of Whole Foods. That's evil shit. And like we know, the workers at the Amazon warehouses are in this same fight right now, right? Let me keep this going.
I've injured myself. I've gotten hurt personally, just trying to speed at enough pace to just keep my numbers up.
Jackie suffered a concussion after hitting her head on an elevator gate while fulfilling an online order.
And pretty much knocked the wind out of me because the order I had was due within 45 minutes. I was rushed to get it done. Therefore, I hit my head, and my management was like, well, shop one order and see how you're feeling. And if it gets worse, then you can go home. So that, to me, that was the day where I was like, yeah, they don't give two shits. They don't care.
Of course they don't. It's a fucking corporation.
A lot of the times it feels like unfair, and it just feels like we're just telling cashiers to go faster, go faster.
Piper works as a customer service supervisor. She says cashiers are tracked too.
IPM is a metric that basically tracks a cashier on how fast they're bringing out items. Ours is 14 right now, and a cashier has to scan and be in those metrics, or they have a coaching session with us. We think all the time, what is the point of this? Why are we trying to make customers go faster, make our cashiers feel more stressed out? It doesn't align with the values that they tell us that we're supposed to have.
I truly believe
doesn't align with the values that we say we have, that we're supposed to have. I want to come back to that point in a second.
the reason why customers keep coming back to us. It's the service, the experience, the passion for our products.
Because most of our cashiers have to reach this metric of going faster, scanning things, typing in things faster, a lot of the times the interaction with the customer is just very short. I know in my experience, a lot of customers come in there just wanting to chat, or at least how are you? How's your day? You know, I think that's kind of lost with Amazon and Whole Foods right now.
Dehumanization.
I've been feeling like, they've been taking advantage of us more and more lately.
It's what you see when businesses grow to the size of monopolies. It's all about control. It's all about making as much profit in as little effort in cost as possible.
Trying to extract the maximum amount of surplus labor out of workers.
Ed and Mace work in the produce department.
Every single day we get a truck.
You're lugging around 40, 50-pound boxes of produce. You pick up a box of broccoli and nobody thinks that it's the worst thing in the world, but it's terrible when the ice in the water goes down your sleeve and hits you in your face.
What I do, I sit in the cooler and I put most of the cold stuff up, and I do that about 90% of the time of my shift. It's very physically taxing to the body. Freezing cold still, even when I go home, feet wet, body wet. I've gotten sick a few times.
That's the kind of work that a lot of people take for granted that keeps society going. People can't get their food, they need that food, and we do that.
And then you think, you're not getting paid right for it.
Workers at this location say they start at about $16 an hour.
Most people can't afford rent on that.
People have to work 2 jobs just to survive.
The estimated living wage for a single person with no children in Philadelphia is $22.29 an hour.
God forbid.
So they're being paid less than the survival wage that's necessary in their locations. And you can better believe in New York and California, that gap is even worse, the wage gap. It's way below survival level.
Forbid they want to start a life, get an apartment, have kids or something.
It's frustrating, very frustrating. I think we're all frustrated.
Upstairs, off of the sales floor, we have a break room. Outside of that break room, right at the entrance, there's a whiteboard that management updates. The metric that is written the largest is the sales from the previous day.
You come in and you see a whiteboard that, kind of spits in your face like, yo, this is how much money we make, but you're not getting none of that.
They're bragging in these meetings about how we're making like 1.6 million before the weekend. That's before the 3 busiest days of the week.
That's some evil shit.
You can't pay people enough to just be able to enjoy their lives. That money's going somewhere and someone's benefiting from it. It's not the workers.
Amazon saw a net income of more than $30 billion in 2023.
I haven't met a team member that hasn't struggled with how much we get paid. I know that I don't shop at Whole Foods, and I know most of my coworkers don't as well.
You want to buy groceries.
As a side note, I hope that anybody who works at Whole Foods is stealing food. I hope that because it's not stealing food. It's compensating for the theft of your wages and your surplus labor that they've taken from you. Don't get fired. And this is not legal advice, but I would hope that that's what's happening.
And be broke after. So, it would be easier to go to other places that you can actually afford.
Whole Foods Market has had a long history of being anti-union. Their founder compared unions to having herpes. Current Whole Foods CEO Jason Hickel has used less direct anti-union messaging.
If a store wants to unionize, your response to it is what?
We feel our best opportunity is having a direct connection to our team members.
In a statement to More Perfect Union, a Whole Foods Market spokesperson said that the company remains committed to listening to team members and pointed to their open door policy as evidence of that.
They have the open door policy because they like to talk to us one-on-one. Because when you're talking to someone one-on-one, you don't have the backing of all of your coworkers. The open door policy is a way to divide us.
The 300 workers at the Center City, Philadelphia Whole Foods will vote on whether to form a union with the UFCW, the United Food and Commercial Workers.
So we would be the only unionized Whole Foods when we win this election.
I'm hoping it will see more of a domino effect.
We could be everybody's first step.
Being a part of this union has made me realize it's a lot bigger than myself.
You have a voice, let it be heard.
I hope that people can look at our store and see that we did it and have the motivation to want to do that too. Stronger in numbers, so.
Shout out to More Perfect Union for that. So there's a couple things that I want to talk about. This to me is like extremely important. There's a couple things that I want to add to what was said there. One is that this Whole Foods case. So like I'm pro organized labor, pro union. This is how you build working class power. The absence of working class power is why we can't have nice things, why American democracy is a shell of itself, why we've turned far right, why MAGA came to power. Most of the bad things in this world that come out of America owe to the weakness of the American working class as a power block. And so that needs to be fixed. Unions are part of that. This is my theory of everything, right? The thing that's distinct and worth spotlighting here about Whole Foods specifically is in that messaging, their identity of the brand, what their fucking corporate shill of a CEO says about family, community, right? He promote like the employees are part of our family. We're together. They present this organic wholeness, unity. The brand is peace, love, and happiness, right? That is very notable because that is a contradiction with what's actually happening, which is immiseration, atomization, grinding people, grinding workers into sickness, paying them less than the survivable wages, right? This is actually what made neoliberalism distinct from just capitalism. Neoliberalism is capitalism, but it's a capitalism that eviscerates, that cannibalizes the social order that sustains capitalism. It's like an unsustainable capitalism because it's the lion that fucking eats its own tail. And so when you grind workers to the point where they can't subsist, then the system breaks down unless you can get more workers, which gets back to the surplus labor thing that I've talked about in the past. But this is like a really important thing. Like Amazon, the Amazonification of any business, but in this case, Whole Foods, grinds those workers down. And it's not actually sustainable unless they can have that renewable surplus labor that they keep bringing in, highly substitutable, right? So working class power, unionization, is how you break that cycle. And so that's what these workers are trying to do. But the reason why I think this is so important is because there's an opportunity. The contradiction between the face of Whole Foods and what it says and the grinding reality on the back end that you just saw in the video, the contradiction is the opportunity, right? This is Stuart Hall shit. The contradiction is the site for agitation, for political change. That makes it ripe as a site to SITE to build working class power. Unionization, the effects of it and the likelihood of success of it are higher at those kinds of places where there's a contradiction. And so Whole Foods is like the ultimate contradiction, because the hippy dippy stuff versus the corporate brutality reality, that contradiction means that there's an argument to be pushed there and people will be more sympathetic. And the brand, to preserve the brand, the leadership is going to have to concede at some point, if you agitate hard enough. And so there's actually like analytics to support this in the form of Adam Tooze's chart book newsletter, just totally happenstance. I think you can see this. So he was doing a comparison because of like some dinner conversation he had between Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. They're both corporate megaliths, right? They're both corporate entities. It's versions that, they're both like products of the neoliberal era, in fact. And they both do huge business and are highly corporate despite their sort of organic vibes. And they do similar levels of business. But what Tooze points out is where this is like, I think just in today's chart book newsletter, which is very good. There's a contrasting data points that strengthen the case for focusing on unionization of Whole Foods, even though they both need to be unionized. Trader Joe's has 593 stores nationwide. Whole Foods has 517 stores nationwide. Similar annual sales. Where they really differ is in size of the stores and the range of goods on offer. The average Whole Foods store is an emporium store stretching over 40,000 square feet. By contrast, the average Trader Joe's location is between 10,000 and 15,000 square feet. The average Whole Foods store carrying around 34,000 SKUs, distinct items, stock keeping units, and larger stores carrying around 50,000 SKUs. A typical Trader Joe's carries around 4,000 stock keeping units, SKUs, right? About 59% of the goods on sale at Trader Joe's are its own brand, 80% of its inventory. The share is much lower of the private label stuff at Whole Foods, the 365 brand. 10% of those items of its SKUs are its own brand. And then this is the kicker. This is the insight. All of this means, this is Adam Tooze speaking, all of this means that the 90,000 people working at Whole Foods seem far more stretched than the 50,000 working for Trader Joe's. The latter, Trader Joe's, sell a simpler inventory from more compact stores, generating a higher revenue per square foot and per staff member. That is the insight. So Trader Joe's is going through its own unionization battle. And in fact, I met a guy last year who was a SALT at Trader Joe's, SALT, which maybe we should do an episode on salting at some point. But like he went in to go work at Trader Joe's specifically to organize a union. And he was telling me these like horror stories about what management at Trader Joe's was doing to repress union organizing there. So like, I don't want to take away from the Trader Joe's struggle, but by the numbers, Amazon is squeezing its workers harder. That's what the Two's chart book thing shows. And so that reality, so the workers are being squeezed harder. The contradiction between the Whole Foods brand and the reality of how it's being run is sharper. And so that those two things mean that there's like, if the workers are being grinded into dirt even more at Amazon or Whole Foods, or maybe we can just call it Amazon, I don't know. But like, if that's the reality, the workers are more likely to share that solidarity of position, right? They're being mutually sort of oppressed together. And when they recognize that, they can realize that it's in their interest to collectively do something about it. And so Whole Foods is ripe for organizing, and it's more likely to be successful if the workers are being punished that much more, if their surplus labor is being captured that much more, right? Through like brutal tactics of technocratic management. And that plus the contradiction of the brand. This is, you agitate hard enough for labor organizing, you point out the hypocrisy as the justification for the demand for unionization, you're going to force the brand to accommodate, or you're going to force them to change their brand, right? So so for one thing, support Whole Foods union efforts, but also like, if you're don't know what to do with your, life or something, there would be worse things to do than to go and work at a Whole Foods and try to unionize it. Be a SALT, be a labor adjutant. That's like an extremely noble profession. So, and you're more likely to succeed there than you are in certain other industries, for the reasons I just specified. So, shout out to More Perfect Union and to the Adam Two's chart book. All right. So what's the next thing we got here? Oh, I meant to share this at the last live stream I did before the Stephen Wertheim episode. But Jason Hickel, who's this great scholar, he was on a panel at the Transnational Institute, which is a kind of like a progressive foreign policy think tank, one of the first ones ever. Actually, they have like an origin story. They are closely tied to the Institute for Policy Studies, which is like a think tank that was born in the Cold War to oppose Cold War militarism, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, this panel that he was on, he had some great comments that I wanted to share about what he calls the Palestinian threat to global capitalism. And there are some caveats that I want to put on what he says, but there are also some things I want to tease out here. So let me see if I can pull. Let's see here. It's like 5 minutes of remarks. I'll pause it intermittently probably, but like, it's fantastic.
Palestine means a liberated Middle East. A liberated Middle East means capitalism in the core really faces a crisis, and they will not let that happen. It's funny, like I'm always asked to talk about ecology, and really what I want to talk about is capitalist imperialism. And the two are just are a piece of the same problem, right? The ecological crisis is ultimately playing out along colonial lines, right? We know that it is the countries of the imperial core that are overwhelmingly responsible, and specifically their ruling classes, who control the means of production and energy systems and investment, et cetera, are overwhelmingly responsible for the excess emissions that are driving climate breakdown, right? We know that's a fact. We also know it's a fact that the global south suffers the overwhelming majority of the impacts of climate breakdown, right? The people who have contributed literally nothing to the crisis whatsoever, not contributed a small amount, contributed nothing, right? And it's not just, of course.
So one caveat on this. So I generally share his analysis. I think that might have been like a point of flair where he says this, like the global south contributes nothing. This is actually like not to global emissions. That is, he's misspeaking. Like that's not true. the global South is a larger carbon emitter now collectively, not any individual country, but collectively as a block, they emit more carbons than any individual country now. And so that's important to note, not as like finger wagging at the global South, but to say that if you don't help the global South with a green transition, if the global South cannot undertake a just green transition, then the climate crisis will never be arrested. There's no chance of addressing the climate crisis unless you address the needs of the global South. And so it's important not to gloss over that point. As an analytical thing, I don't know if people are like familiar with the language or the concept, but in world systems analysis, which is a way that I evaluate the world, Jason Hickel does also, you have these like three categories of sites of activity, which is core, periphery, and semi-periphery, right? The core is an extractive site. It's a site that does the extraction, that benefits from the extraction and exploitation that happens in the periphery. So to be on the periphery of the world system is to be at a site where extraction is happening or where exploitation of labor is happening, right? Where human rights abuses and labor repression happen, where the effects of environmental degradation are like frontline, foregrounded, and the beneficiaries of that are in the core. And the capitalist world system is a capitalist world system. We have all these flows that are connected. We all relate to each other and we touch each other, but in ways that are hierarchical and exploitive and extractive, right? So when he says imperial core, it's his shorthand for referring to the rich countries and the richest ruling class, the entities, the agents in rich countries that benefit from the processes of extraction and exploitation and dispossession that happen in peripheral countries, right? So let me keep going with this.
Climate breakdown that we face, there's also other dimensions of the ecological crisis. And here too we see the same thing playing out. When it comes to excess material use in the world economy, overwhelmingly it's due to excess material use and accumulation in the imperial core. Half of the material use that's used in the core is net appropriated from the periphery, from the territories of the global South, right? Which causes severe damage. You don't see this damage in Sussex or in Finland. You see it in the Congo. You see it in Indonesia, right? You see it in Bolivia, in the frontiers of extraction. The core benefits and everyone else suffers. The ecological crisis represents processes of colonization and appropriation, and also is a disaster that's playing out along colonial lines. I think that's really...
This is one of the things I should say, another pause, sorry. Like sometimes I refer to the imperial mode of living, and he's talking about the same kind of thing here, right? It's this idea that like we have a certain lifestyle that we're accustomed to, right? The iPhone, like we can walk to a Whole Foods and go shopping and have thousands of SKUs on the shelves and all of this, right? This is a way of living that most others in the world do not have and cannot have, and the condition of possibility for us having it under our current system is that others cannot have it. And it's important, the imperial mode of living is a way of referencing that. It's that like you live in France in the 1950s and you're eating croissants in the arrondissement and it's fancy and you look at the fucking Eiffel Tower and shit. You have this cultured bougie lifestyle, but it's with a wealth and with a standard of living that has involved colonial exploitation and extraction elsewhere in the world. And the world system's perspective draws attention to that interdependence, that hierarchical interdependence, in part because those kinds of systems are not sustainable. And the only question is like, how do they unravel, over what period of time, that kind of thing. And so like recognizing that the way that we live is not in a bubble independent of the rest of the world. It's dependent on the world eating shit to some degree. And that's what Jason Hickel is trying to drive home here in a concrete way.
Important to spell out. And if we're not attentive to those colonial dimensions, I really think we're fundamentally missing the point. We're fundamentally missing the point. The other thing I want to point out here is that we're in this incredible paradox, right, where the world economy, we know, is just massively productive. Like, our productive capacities are incredible. Think of the scale of the labor that humanity has at its disposal, the resources, the technology, the factories, the energy, the materials. Incredible amounts of production to the point of breaking past ecological limits. And yet, the vast majority of the human population lives in conditions of massive deprivation. 80% of the population can't meet basic needs. So what explains this incredible paradox? It's ultimately our system of production. The social and ecological crisis that we face, which appears unresolvable, is ultimately a symptom of our system of production, capitalism, where our productive capacities, our incredible productive capacities, are organized overwhelmingly around what is most profitable to capital and what can most facilitate accumulation in the core, rather than what is obviously necessary to meet human needs and achieve our ecological objectives. And so we're in this wild place where it's like, oh, solving poverty is just going to take generations, right? If we're lucky, we'll get people above $1.90 a day by the end of the century, right? The climate crisis, who can figure out how to solve this? It seems intractable. None of this is true. It's lies. These are problems that can be very easily solved and very quickly. The problem is that we don't have control over our own productive capacities because we don't have an economic democracy, right? Some of us live in political democracies where from time to time we get to elect government officials. But when it comes to the economic system, not even the pretense of democracy is allowed to exist. And that is ultimately the contradiction we face, I think, right? This is a crisis that at its root is about capitalism.
So I'll keep going with this in a second, but I wanted to foot stomp this economic democracy thing. Like, I'm sure some of you know, when Martin Luther King was agitating for civil rights, it was part of what he called the Poor People's Campaign against militarism for what he called economic democracy. This concept of economic democracy was prominent in progressive and left politics, non-revolutionary politics. So apologies to the communists on the stream. But economic democracy was this really crucial lodestar of our political imagination and of what we demanded all the way up until the 80s. And then in the 80s, Jesse Jackson's presidential campaign was the last to ever mention economic democracy. And then we go into the unipolar moment. We get Clinton third way neoliberal bullshit. And ever since then, economic democracy has been absent from our imagination and our lexicon. And it's about full employment and a social safety net sufficient to, and a wage share for workers of the national income that's sufficient to ensure that people can experience democracy, government by the people, even if it's representative, And so it's like economic democracy is the material basis for democracy. So like political democracy is always going to be hollow if you don't have a material follow through. This is one of the perversions of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, when it becomes about identity politics. And when you have Nancy Pelosi kneeling in the rotunda in the fucking kente cloth, that capture of the symbolic identity dimension of Black Lives Matter is on its face, it's a good thing. But if that's the horizon and if that's as far as it goes, that's fucked, because Black lives don't matter if you don't have policies of material redress for the structural violence and the inequities that Black people face. It is not just about symbolic recognition. And if symbolic recognition happens without material equality as the follow through, then it is elite capture. It is corrupting of the thing itself. It's a perversion, So economic democracy is the real democracy, the material basis of real democracy. And in America, it hasn't even been in our vocabulary the past fucking 40 years. All right, sorry.
And can only be resolved by overcoming that fact. And the antidote to capitalism is economic democracy, that we should have collective democratic control over what we are producing, what the goals of our production are, who benefits from our production, and so on.
It's not that that's actually socialism, and that can be socialism is a form of economic democracy, but economic democracy does not have to be narrowly about workers owning the means of production, although that is one way to do it.
And when we do, we can solve these problems quickly, right? We know exactly what to do. The problem is we don't have the power. And so I think that in the face of this crisis, we have to have clarity about what has to be achieved, and we have to start building the movements that are capable of achieving that. For the South, there's another element I think we have to pay attention to, which is that they need economic sovereignty, right? They need economic liberation at a national level first.
That's crucial.
The global North is overwhelmingly responsible for the crisis, but the global South, we know, also needs to engage in ecological planning, energy transition, et cetera, et cetera. How does anyone expect them to do that when they do not have sovereign control over their own resources, their own labor, their own lands, their own energy, right?
This is the crucial point of all of this. The global South must have economic sovereignty. And like neoliberal globalization literally opposed that. It was about the IMF loans, the Washington Consensus, everything that had to do with economic policy for the past 40 years plus has been about preventing the global South, and previously known as the Third World, from exercising economic sovereignty. Because economic sovereignty for small nations would prevent capital mobility and labor mobility. And those things are what ensured surplus labor, maximum profits, right? And so the neoliberal globalization was this global framework that stood in opposition to economic sovereignty for the global South. But economic sovereignty, as Jason Hickel is diagnosing here, is what the global South must have in order to actually develop. And what's fucked about our current age is that in the era of great power competition, can you see the book? We have a whole chapter in this book about how great power competition is antithetical to economic democracy. And it's because of partly what Jason Hickel is pointing out here, right? Small states, the global South, need to be able to exercise economic democracy in order to address their many needs, their economic insecurity of their people. That is economic sovereignty, right? Great power competition on the basis of China, we tell the fucking global South they're not allowed to have Huawei as a low-cost provider of digital infrastructure. We're going to give them some development assistance, but the condition is that they have to divest from doing business with China, right? China can't invest in their ports because that's a national security threat for us, right? We're going to look askance at any Chinese investment that comes into the global South. We see that as a threat. We've securitized it in our minds. We're literally spending a lot of our own diplomatic capital not on doing anything good, but on trying to persuade the global South to choose us and not China, choose us at the expense of China. And that cuts off the global South from the main trading partner with the global South, which is China, and the main bilateral lender, the first choice lender for development assistance in the global South is also China, their main creditor. So we're trying to cut them off from that and instead deal with us, but we're not offering them anything like the same deal of what China can offer them. And so the global South needs access to both of us, and economic sovereignty lets them make that decision to engage with both of us. But our foreign policy is trying to stop that. And so great power competition, as practiced by Washington, is transgressing against the economic sovereignty of the global South in the same way, but just with a different flavor, as neoliberal globalization transgressed against the economic sovereignty of the global South. So ultimately, the new paradigm of post-neoliberalism, if it takes the form of fucking flag-waving nationalism, the global South is still fucked by it. All right.
Under the thumb of structural adjustment programs that prevent them from using progressive industrial policy, prevent them from using progressive fiscal policy, prevent them from using progressive monetary policy, basic tools that we know can allow them to achieve developments and ecological transition, they are effectively denied from using. What is the solution to that for the South? Is struggles for economic liberation, right? Now, I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that a struggle for economic liberation in the South is fundamentally antithetical to the capitalist world economy. Because accumulation in the core depends utterly on the cheapening of labor and resources in the global South. It depends utterly on that and has for the past 500 years. And so any attempt by liberation struggles in the periphery to achieve economic independence, to use their own resources for their own development, for their own ecological transition, for their own human needs, is destabilizing for capital in the core. And capital reacts with the most...
So he's right about that, and that is the transcendent phenomenon the past several hundred years. Like in a capitalist world system, it has been the case that a cheapening of labor, hoarding of surplus value of labor, all of that stuff, that's a way of telling the story of our history the past several hundred years. That's fucking terrible, right?
Extraordinary violent backlashes. We see it happening all the time. Now it is Palestine, before it was Libya, before it was Iraq, before it was Chile, before...
Oh, the thing I wanted to say about that, though, is that the national security state and like the foreign policy intellectuals who are responsible for our machinery of death, they don't think that the world works the way he's describing it. They don't have an alternative theory for how the world works. They just don't think about it. This is if you are exceptionalist in your ideology, if you exist to like worship power and you're mostly just thinking about buzzwords like integrated deterrence and alliances and shit like that, talking about the national interest as if it's like a real thing. When you're doing all of that, you don't have to think too hard about like, how does the world actually work? And what Jason Hickel is saying is how the world has actually worked. And I just point this out because the people who are responsible for the death dealing, they're not conscious or aware that the world works this way. They have not been challenged to face this narrative, this empirically backed narrative, this historical reality. And so there's at least there's a gap or an opportunity for consciousness raising among elites. Will it change anything? I don't know, probably not, but it's worth at least pushing them to confront the reality of what they're complicit in. All right.
It was Indonesia, before it was the Congo. It will never stop. It's over and over again. And I think the situation in Palestine right now, we have to understand, is not primarily a moral one. That's how we think of it. That is not how capital thinks of it. For them, it is a matter of suppressing and crushing liberation movements, because a liberated Palestine means a liberated Middle East. A liberated Middle East means capitalism in the core really faces a crisis, and they will not let that happen. And they're unleashing the full violence of their extraordinary power to ensure it doesn't. And so I think that's really what we face, right? It's the world system dimension of the violence that we're seeing. And we have to be cognizant of that, and our struggles and our resistance have to be in proportion.
So the thing that's great about that is, I mean, that's like a take that I have not heard too many actually offer. It's not that like Israel or the US is looking at Palestine and is like, we need to commit a genocide in order to extract more profit. That's not the calculation that's going on. But this materialist angle that Hickel is providing is important, because it's like following the money is a way of knowing where the logical incentives are. What is the logical incentives for the trajectory of policy to go? The trajectory of policy toward the global South, and acutely Palestine, is to go in this direction of violence, of redirecting insecurity away from the global North, redirecting insecurity toward the global South. where it finds expression is going to change. Palestine has been the point of production for insecurity for a long time, right? They've had to eat it among the worst. But like there are lots of these sites that pop up over time, and like that's a bit of like a guessing game, or like good analysis can sort of predict that to some degree. But it's just the idea that like as long as the global south needs to be a place where cheap labor, cheap surplus labor is possible, where natural resource extraction is possible, where it's possible to redraw lines of sovereignty through dispossession, Trump with the Panama Canal, for example, right? All of those things, the global south is a place where those things can happen. And that is to the benefit of capital. And those things are inevitably going to happen if material incentives drive them that way. And the only force to stop it is an opposing force, which is a global working class. You know, individualized militant movements might oppose things here or there, but they're also going to spread a lot of fucking violence. A global working class consciousness, a world system that functions on a different logic is the answer. Obviously, fucking super hard to do, you know. But that was very insightful from Jason Hickel. Oh, I missed a thing in the chat earlier. Sorry. On the Whole Foods segment, Flop Donkey. Not sure if you mentioned it. One of the reasons unionization in the USA is so ineffective is because when it happens, it's often an individual store or a warehouse doing it, then less frequently an entire company. Unionization in the rest of the world is demonstrably a lot more successful and effective when it's industry-wide. Yeah, the problem is you can't... there are many reasons why unionization in the US has been ineffective. Like America has laws that prevent unionization in fully like half the country, you know, right to work, quote unquote, laws in the South in America, you know. That's a huge hindrance. The NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, how easy it is to organize and to defend workers' interests depends on who is staffing the NLRB, and that those are appointed by the president at any given time, you know. And the NLRB has mostly been against workers for most of my lifetime. So there's the capitalist culture, hustle and grind, this individualized lifestyle that dominates, that has been hegemonic in my lifetime in America. All of that works against the interests of workers, you know? So there's many reasons. And the individual unionization of like a specific warehouse or a specific store, that's because it's not that that's the most effective strategy. It's the only strategy given the constraints. Like organizing industry-wide, it's true this stuff works better if you can organize on a mass-based level, but logistically it's extremely hard to do, you know. The one advantage, an interesting thing in American organizing, labor organizing, is that individual units and stores and warehouses and stuff, they fall into, even though they organize as an individual site, an individual store, they they become physically part of larger unions like the UAW or the UFCW, SEIU. So huge national unions that cover many industries, not just one industry, all unionizing together. That's powerful, you know? So yes, I share the sentiments. It's really tough to get the ball rolling in the USA. It absolutely is. And that's how they would like it to be. You know what I mean? All right. Well, I think I'm ready to do a raid if someone has suggestions for whom to raid. I was going to do a thing on Zelensky's conversation with Lex Fridman, but it's like it's a fucking 3-hour interview. I need to cherry pick which things to talk about. So I'm probably going to save that for the next stream. But if you guys have suggestions about a raid person, oh, Peacefire Now is fucking open for business. Let me see here. Let's see this. Send you over to Peacefire Now. Who is the man? All right. This was super fun, guys. I'll catch you next time. I appreciate you, Flop Donkey. All right. Here we go.